Hello, I am Kendall, and welcome back to the APES Bedtime Show. I'm glad to be with you today because we're going to continue our series, Who's That Earthling? The series where we ask people questions about their environment to spread awareness of environmental changes. Today, we will be interviewing the upcoming podcast star, Cameron Wynn.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cameron. Thanks for having me on the show today.
It's great to have you. Now let's begin the interview. Can you evaluate how the tragedy of the commons demonstrates the failure of shared source management in human societies?
That's a good question. The tragedy of the commons occurs when individuals acting independently and rationally according to their own self-interest deplete a shared, limited resource even when it's clear that this action is contrary to the group's long-term best interest. This demonstrates a failure of shared resource management because the individual incentive for a short-term gain outweighs the collective responsibility for the long-term sustainability, leading to the ruin of the resource for all users.
That's a great evaluation, Cameron. Now can you propose one policy or community strategy that could prevent this outcome in a modern society?
Well, of course I can. One effective policy to prevent the tragedy of the commons is to establish a system of private property rights or clear, legally binding common property governance. For example, a fishery, a government or international body could implement a total allowable catch, TAC, that is enforced by individual transferable quotas where fishermen are allocated a specific share of the TAC, thus creating an individual stake in the resource's health and incentivizing sustainable harvesting.
What a unique policy. Next question. How does clear cutting provide short term benefits but undermines long term ecosystem services?
Well, honestly, in my opinion, clear cutting provides short-term economic benefits by maximizing the immediate yield of lumber and allowing for efficient replanting of single-species stands. However, it severely undermines long-term ecosystem services by causing soil erosion, increasing water runoff, and fragmenting habitats, which reduces biodiversity. The loss of established root systems and shade also degrades the soil's fertility and its capacity to cycle nutrients and retain water, which are essential ecosystem services.
Oh, I see. And how do you suggest one sustainable forestry method that could protect biodiversity while maintaining resource access?
I believe the best solution would be selective cutting as a sustainable forestry method that protects biodiversity by removing only intermediately aged or matured trees, individually or in small groups. This maintains the overall structure and species diversity of the forest canopy and understory. This practice allows for continuous natural regeneration, minimizing soil disturbance, and preserves the essential ecosystem services provided by a diverse, multi-aged forest.
You brought to light a whole new perspective. All right, next. How has the Green Revolution reshaped agricultural efficiency and environmental health on a global scale?
I would say, to put it simply, the Green Revolution dramatically reshaped agricultural efficiency by introducing high-yield crop varieties like wheat and rice, along with new practices such as the heavy use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and mechanized farming methods. This drastically increased food production and prevented widespread famine in many parts of the world. But it harms environmental health by causing water pollution from fertilizer runoff. This contributed to soil degradation and led to the development of pesticide-resistant pests.
Okay, now defend or refute whether the overall legacy of the Green Revolution is positive for the environment.
I would say that the overall legacy of the Green Revolution is arguably not positive for the environment. While it prevented deforestation, and that might have occurred if traditional low-yield farming had needed to expand into natural areas to meet the rising food demand, its reliance on fossil fuels for synthetic inputs and machinery has contributed significantly to climate change. Furthermore, the environmental costs of widespread eutrophication, loss of biodiversity, and pesticide contamination represent a profound degradation of natural systems that persist today.
That's a powerful refutation, Cameron. Moving on to other farming techniques, can you compare the environmental trade-offs between traditional and modern farming practices used on large commercial farms?
You're presenting quite a good comparison. Traditional farming practices often have a trade-off of lower yield but better environmental sustainability, as they rely on techniques like natural manure and crop rotation, which maintain soil health and reduce reliance on synthetic inputs. Modern farming practices, typical of large commercial farms, trade high yields and profits for environmental costs, as they rely on monocultures and heavy synthetic input use, leading to trade-offs like increased greenhouse gas emissions and pollution of water resources.
It sounds like we need a middle ground. Can you recommend one innovative solution that you could balance productivity and sustainability?
Without a doubt, precision agriculture is an innovative solution that balances productivity and sustainability by using technologies like GPS sensors and drones to apply inputs such as water, fertilizer, and pesticides only where and when they're needed. This targeted approach maintains high crop yields by optimizing resource use, while simultaneously minimizing environmental impacts like runoff, pollution, and over-application of chemicals, thus boosting efficiency and sustainability.
Precision agriculture sounds very promising. Now let's talk about water. Can you examine how irrigation practices affect both local water resources and local health, soil health?
Well, that's a critical issue. Irrigation practices directly affect local water resources by drawing large volumes from resources like rivers and aquifers, which can lead to water scarcity and aquifer depletion in the region. They affect soil health because inefficient methods like flood irrigation can cause waterlogging and increase soil salinity as the water evaporates and leaves behind dissolved salts, which eventually degrades the land's ability to support crop growth.
If you were designing a farm in an arid region, which irrigation method would you choose and why? That's a sensible choice for water conservation. Moving on to pest control. Can you evaluate how pesticide resistance evolves and how it affects global food security?
In fact, I can. The evolution of pesticide resistance is a fascinating and scary example of evolution. Pesticide resistance evolves through the process of natural selection, where the few pests that possesses a natural genetic immunity to a pesticide survive its application and reproduce, passing on their resistant traits to their offspring, leading to a population dominated by resistant individuals over time. This affects global food security because as pests become harder to kill, crop yields decrease, requiring more pesticide use or leading to significant crop losses. This significantly increases the cost of food production and threatens the reliability of global food supply.
What a challenge. How do you propose an integrated approach that minimizes resistance while maintaining crop yield? That seems like a comprehensive strategy. Next, let's tackle the complex issue of meat production. Can you analyze the environmental, economic, and ethical trade-offs between CAFOs and free-range grazing systems?
Well, it's a huge topic with many factors. CAFOs offer the economic trade-off of lower consumer prices and higher efficiency due to concentrated production, but they incur environmental trade-offs like massive indoor runoff pollution and high greenhouse gas emissions, and ethical trade-offs regarding poor animal welfare. Free-range grazing systems offer the environmental trade-off of better soil health and reduced pollution and higher ethical standards for animal welfare, but they entail the economic trade-off of higher land use requirements and ultimately higher costs for consumers.
If global meat consumption were to be reduced, how do you predict this might reshape ecosystems and resource systems? A powerful prediction. Shifting focus to aquatic resources, can you assess how overfishing alters marine food webs and impacts human economies? That sounds like an issue requiring global cooperation. Can you design one international policy that could help sustain fisheries for future generations? A fantastic policy proposal. Now let's talk about mining. Can you explain how mining operations will fuel economic development and degrade natural systems? That's a clear explanation of the dilemma. Which solution, technological innovation, regulation, or community action, do you believe could be most effectively reduce these impacts?
Well, I would argue that regulation could most effectively reduce the negative impacts of mining, as it is the only solution that can mandate and enforce the adoption of best practices, such as stringent pollution controls, mandatory land reclamation, and environmental impact assessments across the entire industry. While technological innovation is helpful and community action provides oversight, only legally binding regulations can force companies to internalize the full environmental costs of their operations and ensure industry-wide compliance.
It seems enforcement is key. For our final topic, let's discuss cities. Can you examine how urban growth influences the carbon and hydrologic cycles on a regional scale?
Urban growth influences the carbon cycle by increasing anthropogenic emissions from vehicular traffic, industry, and energy use for buildings, which raises the concentration of carbon dioxide regionally. It influences the hydrologic cycle by replacing natural ground cover with impermeable surfaces, like concrete and asphalt. This decreases surface runoff, decreases groundwater infiltration, and raises the temperature of the water, contributing to the flashlighting of the urban heat island effect.
That's a perfect analysis. To wrap up the interview, can you propose a city planning strategy that could help make urban areas more resilient to environmental change?
Thanks for the compliment. I believe a great solution is to implement green infrastructure, like installing green roofs, permeable pavement, and urban rain gardens. These features collectively increase the amount of water infiltration into the ground, reducing the risk of flooding, while also increasing the evapotranspiration process. This naturally cools the city and mitigates the urban heat island effect, making the city more adapted to climate-related stresses.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on APES BedTime Show, Cameron.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast to answer all these fun questions.
And let's thank the audience for tuning in this episode of Who's That Earthling. And I hope to see you again next time.
And remember, as always, stay free like free lawn.